All right, so this is philosophy, Intro to Philosophy, the fourth class, and we've talked about in the last couple classes, I hope you've watched the videos, okay? Watch them all the way through. You'll note that these are conversational, and I will go around in circles, and we will get to where we get, but it is very conversational, so enjoy the conversation as best you can, okay? And it will make you smart, I promise you. It's the process. You read Euthyphro, correct? And all the heads are going like this, right? And you'll notice there was a process, and you'll notice one of the criticisms that Euthyphro leveled at Socrates was what? You talk in circles, man. Philosophy's kind of like that. We're going to ask questions, and we're going to circle back and ask other questions, or apply what we learn and stuff like that. So I'm going to try to be linear. Keep in mind, though, philosophy is not me necessarily lecturing and you taking notes. There'll be parts of that. Part of it's that. But a lot of it's just talking. And philosophy is a doing thing, not just a listening and hearing thing. Although it's great to listen and hear, okay? So let's see what you learned from the videos. What's philosophy? And by the way, you were there for day one, and so too were you, Emily. So because I had you live, I'm gonna make you two wait for a little bit. I want to test how well people are learning via video. All right. So Drew, what is philosophy?
I watched it. I can't remember exactly what.
It's a word, and the word means something.
Yes, correct.
What does it mean?
I think that's
Phileo and Sophia. Slaughter.
I wish I could tell you.
And I wish you could too. You can. It just give me a minute. You okay?
Love of wisdom.
Love of wisdom. There we go. There it is. Write it down. These are test questions. Definitions are big in philosophy. Love of wisdom. And you'll notice a pattern. I then ask the question, what is wisdom, right? What?
Right.
And we came up with a definition of wisdom. Did you get it? No, wait, you were there. You can't say it because you were here. Mariana, what is wisdom? Going back to Slaughter. No. Go ahead, sir.
Applying your knowledge.
Yeah, but we use, there's the application. It's knowledge applied, go ahead, to the proper end. Yeah, because remember that there's that moral component to it. Okay? And that's how you and I got on the topic of Ted Kaczynski, right? Because I said, Ted Kaczynski has knowledge and he applied it to make bombs and kill people, but I'd say that was immoral. Okay? I understand his rationale behind it, but I'd still say that it's immoral, okay? Okay, so he was unjustified. Those were unjustified killings, you know. Well, anyway, so there's a moral component to wisdom, okay? So you have knowledge rightly applied to its proper end. And then, so the next question is, well, what is knowledge? And we've had a lot of conversations, and I have not quite given you the full answer. A lot has come out as we've talked. We talked about justification of belief, right? That I asked, can you know something and not believe it? I asked the other class, do you have to believe something to say you know it? You're thinking, you're going, I don't know. Do you remember us asking this question in the video? You didn't watch the whole video because there's a whole segment on that. Yeah, watch the whole video. Do you have to believe something to know it? You say yes. You say no. Can you give me an example of something you know that you do not believe?
Can I give an example of something that like someone else would know but not believe? Like an atheist would know what the Bible says, but then wouldn't believe it to be true.
Yeah, but that's not what I'm asking.
Okay.
But this is where the problem is. An atheist could say that Jesus says he's God, but not believe it, right? That's fine. But can the atheist know that, can the atheist know that Jesus exists and not believe he exists?
Yes.
He can say, I know you exist, Muad. Am I saying it right, Muad? Muad. Can I say, I know, Muad, that you exist, but I don't believe you exist? I can say it, but I mean, can I actually believe it and know it at the same time?
Yes.
I can. I can know you exist and not believe you exist.
Yes. Actually, no. I watched the video.
Yeah, I know. Look, you guys should have a headache after you leave here, okay? If you don't, we're not doing our work. Okay? Can I know I exist and not believe I exist?
No.
Can I know 2 + 2 is 4 and not believe 2 + 2 is 4?
No.
Right. You saw me, we're talking about court. You're on the stand and I say, sir, can you point to the killer? And you go, it's Slaughter. Slaughter did it. And I say, you know Slaughter killed Dr. Green in the study with the lead pipe? And you say, yes, I know this. I said, and then all of a sudden I say, all right, I rest my case. And I go sit down and the defense attorney comes up and he says, Mr. Drew here, you say you know Slaughter killed Mr. Green with the lead pipe in the study, right?
Uh-huh.
And you says, yes, I know this. And
Yeah,
you
I
say,
know this.
do you believe this? And you say, no, I don't believe
No,
this.
I don't believe it.
Thank you.
Case closed. Right? She's innocent, right? 'Cause how would a jury convict you? Seems to me that if you know something, you must also believe it, okay? Now, we talked about justification last week, and one of my students said, well, in order to know something, not just to believe it, but you must have some justification for it. Okay, some reason to believe. They called it evidence, okay? And we'll call that justification. And there are different ways we justify beliefs. One of the ways is through empirical verification, and that's through the 5 senses, like see, touch, taste, smell, hear, or they say touch, taste, smell, hear, or they say taste. See, right? Saw it with my own 2 eyes. You know, the scientific methodology is generally based off of, as they would say, the empirical verification method, okay? But they use laws of logic and they use, math, which is not very empirical at all, okay? And we'll talk about that in a second. Another way to justify belief is through testimony. Somebody told me. Matthew told me that Jesus existed. Matthew told me that he rose from the dead and that he saw this and that that 400 others saw it too, okay? That Jesus spent time with his, not just with his disciples, but with others, okay? And was around for 40 days after he rose again, okay? And then he, rose, I forget, sorry. Okay, so there we go. Testimony. You go to court. I saw the killer. I saw him pull the gun, right? I saw him shoot the gun. I saw the person drop, okay? Saw him steal the car, whatever, okay? Testimony. Our history books are testimony based off of testimony. Are they always 100% accurate? No. Does that mean that we can't get knowledge from them? No. Did George Washington exist? How do you know? Does anybody know George Washington exists in here?
No, I believe he did.
You do believe he exists. Why do you believe he exists?
Because people write about him.
Because people wrote about him, right? So they've borne testimony that there were things, there are artifacts that are said to have been written by his own hand. There are paintings of him. There's documentation and the like. Testimony, okay? Is testimony reliable? Yeah. Yes, it is. Is it always 100% reliable? No, it is not. No, it's not. That's why you need the full picture. I've learned a lot, even with eyewitness accounts. I believe with my own eyes to see things, and then I see the context later on and go, I learned a whole new story there than what was told to me. Okay? Even by my own eyes. All right, so what's another way to be justified in believing things? That the last video, you should get all this also, is your memory. You remember things, and you can draw inferences from things you remember. And I remember my dad telling me as a kid, you know, college football, they used to at the end of the year or beginning of the year, sometimes they'd have a college team play the professional teams, right? And I said, oh wow, that must have been interesting. He says, yeah, but they stopped it because the pros were always winning. I said, well, that makes sense, they're pros. And I had never heard it from anybody else, and I really questioned my dad about it. But as soon as I saw, on YouTube comes along, and all of a sudden I see these games of college teams playing pro teams. I'm like, oh my God, my dad was right. So I drew a new conclusion that my dad was correct about something, that he wasn't lying about making something up, that is supported, even if I didn't hear it before. So I had a memory, and I drew a new inference from it, okay? Drew a new conclusion. So I'd gained knowledge, from a memory, and about a memory. And then finally, reason. Reason is generally like the laws of logic. If A is taller than B and B is taller than C, then A is taller than C. Bob is taller than John, is John taller than Sue, then Bob is taller than Sue. I don't need to see any of these people to know that if A is taller than B and B is taller than C, then A is taller than C. I don't need to know that. It's the laws of logic. I can know that A is not non-A, right? A cannot be non-A. A dog cannot be a non-dog. Okay? If a dog is not a non-dog. Okay? A wall can be white and blue, but a wall cannot be white and non-white. Make sense? Okay, so laws of logic. And there are all sorts of laws of logic. If A is identical to B and B is identical to C, then A is identical to C. Okay? Nothing weird about that. Okay, you just plug in what goes with the letter. And so the big debate in epistemology, if you've listened to our lectures, epistemology is the area of philosophy that deals with knowledge. Okay, it's a study of knowledge. The goal of epistemology is to gain truth and avoid falsehood. So, the big debate in epistemology has generally been about between reason and empiricism, rationalism and empiricism. The debate which source of justification is better for knowledge, which yields knowledge better, rationalism, the use of reason, or empiricism, the use of the senses. The scientific revolution was an epistemological revolution. That is, it was a philosophical debate. That is, the scientific revolution was one where they said empiricism is king over knowledge, not rationalism. So if you can't touch, taste, smell, or hear it, quantify it in such terms, then you cannot know it. And philosophers such as David Hume would argue for that. So what they call logical positivism, which is the extreme form of empiricism, which says you can only know things if you can touch, taste, smell, hear, see them, test them through the senses. Well, that would mean, what does that mean for belief in God or morality? It means you can't quantify these things. You can't test them physically in that regard, and thus, or empirically through the senses, and thus you cannot know them. So you cannot know God exists. You cannot know certain things are morally good or morally bad. Qualitative statements such as better, good, better, and best, right? Morally good or beautiful are now subjective. They are not, because they are not scientific, right? Because they don't follow the empirical verificationist method. And when I say the word scientific, I want you to take note that the word epistemology, knowledge, the word knowledge comes from the Greek word episteme, right? and that's where we get epistemology. So episteme just means knowledge in Greek. And then in Latin, it is scientia, S-C-I-E-N-T-I-A, scientia, which means knowledge. And what does scientia resemble? What word? Science, right? So if somebody goes, I'm a science major, you're a knowledge major. Okay, great. You know, well, that's just science. Well, they mean, so is there historical knowledge, science that is, scientia? Can we know George Washington is the president? Is that scientia, knowledge, or episteme, knowledge? Can we know this painting is beautiful, right? Can you have knowledge of beauty? You say yes. Some people say no, and I say they are wrong. And one of my best friends says, oh, no, you can't. I'm like, yeah, I've seen the girls you date, dude. You're such a liar. Because if beauty is, literally, if beauty, there's no such thing as beauty. They gotta be all over the place, right? But no, he's not. He's clearly not. So, but certainly the scientific revolution, this change in views of the best justification for knowledge between empiricism or reason, the rationalistic debate, has certainly wreaked havoc on religion and aesthetics, that is having to do with beauty and morality. Because if you tell people you can only know things through the senses, and what does that do to moral claims? Now you have to come up with some, quote, physical scientific account for what morality is. And that just tends to be arbitrary, and tends to actually justify all sorts of craziness. I mean, think of what Darwinism, the moral things that Darwinism justified. The Holocaust was justified. Eugenics was justified based on Darwinism. Who knows what eugenics is?
Like, isn't that where you choose the characteristics for the child before they're born?
Okay, so
Or
kind of, yeah, that's how, yeah, that would be an application of it, sure, yeah, absolutely. So eugenics, okay, first of all, the word eugenics has to do with genes, and it comes, there's this, whenever you use the word you before anything like utopia, that's the good society, right? Euthanasia, that's good death, right? Eugenics, good genes, right? So eudaimonia is happiness. So we have eugenics, which is good genes, and so what the idea was that through genetic, social Darwinism and all that, we could create a better race. The Nazis used it, trying to create the master race, and so they were, getting rid of the handicapped, the Jews, the gypsies, all the people they viewed as inferior to them. Margaret Sanger, does anybody know who Margaret Sanger is?
She founded.
Who's Margaret Sanger?
Founder of Planned Parenthood.
Planned Parenthood is a what?
Murder house.
Murder house, that's one way of calling an abortion clinic, yep.
To limit the black population.
She wanted to weed out, so during the 1930s in America, the eugenics movement started, and Margaret Sanger created Planned Parenthood to get rid of the black race and other races in particular. And the idea was to do two things. It was to abort them and to use contraceptives to keep them from breeding too much, okay? There were, I think it was Fitter Families for Alabama, where they sterilized like 50,000 people because they saw them as unfit to have children. Then you had the eugenics movement with the Tuskegee experiments, where they took a bunch of black men and they were experimenting on them with syphilis drugs, right? And so they were giving them these drugs they gave them syphilis, okay? And then they were giving them drugs to cure it. But then they ran out of funding. So what they did was they said, well, we could change our experiment because we have no money to make the drugs. What we can do is we can just see what the advanced stages of syphilis does to the human body. And what they did was they told these men who were in the study, they said, look, we're gonna be giving you this medication, but if you leave the study to go get treatment elsewhere, and they were giving them placebos, fake drugs, if you leave, we'll not give your family any money to bury you or whatever, or any kind of life. They had some kind of thing that kept them in there, right? And they tortured these men to death just for the name of science. Just for the name of science, right? And so the eugenics movement has done a lot of stuff, and one of the things it's doing now is to create the eugenics movement is for us to design our babies and to get rid of certain diseases and the like. And it all sounds noble until you've got, 12 million Jews and gypsies and, otherwise, people killed. Is it Norway? I think it's Norway. They have zero, they boast that they have 0 people in their population with Down syndrome. Why do they have 0 people in their population with
Because they
Down?
kill them before they can be born.
Because they test them first, and then if a woman is found that she has Down syndrome, she has to abort the baby. Yeah, okay? So much for human rights, okay? All right, so, science, this whole thing of, when I say science, I mean empiricism without, you try to create a morality without God and all that, you're gonna run into this stuff, all right? Okay, so what is the debate between reason and empiricism? The rationalists who believe reason is the best source of justification for knowledge, and the empiricists. Well, if the empiricists believe you can know things only through the senses, well, the rationalists are the ones who suggest that you could believe things beyond the senses through reason. And I've given you certain examples, like I can know all triangles are 3-sided objects. I can know that if I have a triangle, I have a 3-sided object. I can know that if there was a result, there must have been a cause, okay? I don't need to see the cause. In fact, remind me your name up there, young lady. Caitlin, who's doing criminal justice, the laws of evidence. You go into CSI, like you and I like those shows, right? Mm-hmm. Somebody's dead. There must have been a cause. Yeah. There's the knife in the back. Knives don't just jump up on their own and jump into backs, right? Somebody must have put that knife there. We're using the laws of reason, logic, right? Mm-hmm. We didn't need to see the killer to know that there is a killer. Yeah. That's right. Our senses aren't telling us this. Laws of logic are. Now, of course, we could use both, and I believe we can, but there is a debate. You got to understand that there are some people who, would say, well, I didn't say it, I don't believe it. And they're usually, by the way, that's kind of self-referentially defeating. Because where did that rule come from? That if you can't sense it, you can't know it? Did you sense that? Did you do some scientific experiment? No, you did not, right? That's just arbitrary. You've just made that up, okay? There's no scientific, experiment that proved that one can only know things through the senses, all right? That's a philosophical assumption, and a bad one at that. So in the first lecture of the class, I mentioned that there are 3 areas of philosophy, and I've only discussed 2 up until now. I've only discussed really epistemology and ethics. In the first lecture I mentioned it, but I didn't talk about it too much. We're not gonna get too deep into it because we're not going anywhere more than epistemology for the time being and our readings. The second area of philosophy is metaphysics. So there are 3 main areas of inquiry in philosophy. There is epistemology, the study of knowledge, right? which seeks to gain truth and avoid falsehood. And then there's metaphysics, and then you have ethics. Okay? I just want to make that clear. I know we're going to go bounce back to epistemology here, but because metaphysics studies the world, and by the world I don't mean Earth, I mean everything that exists. Make sense? And it asks the question, what does it mean to exist? And we'll ask that question a lot as time goes on. What does it mean to exist? What types of things exist? Okay? We'll use a lot, and we'll ask you, what are you? What does it mean to be human? Does God exist? We'll talk about all of that good stuff, all these great metaphysical questions. All right. I need to put that out there before we get back to metaphysics. So, with knowledge, we're still trying to define knowledge. And we said knowledge has to do with some form of justification and belief, right? Is that all? Is that it? How much time we have left?
What time is this class?
What time is it at?
At 12:15.
That's what I thought. We got plenty of time, 20 minutes. Boy, you got a lot of learning you could do in 20 minutes. All right. What else is required for knowledge? If you have to believe something, you have to have a belief and maybe some justification. There's more to that justification thing. Watch the other video about what we said about warrant, okay? If you don't know what warrant is, look it up in the video and watch the discussion on that, okay? Because we'll discuss that more too. But what else do you need beyond some kind of reasons to believe something? Are all beliefs knowledge? That's a better question.
No.
Drew says no. You say no. What do you say? You say, I don't know. You neither. Do you know something just because you believe it? Before I let these, anyway. Are all of your beliefs knowledge? How many of you, well, no, I'll ask that in a minute. All right, tell me what's going on, Drew.
So we can take the knife in the back example.
Mm-hmm.
You can have 3 suspects and believe it's the one on the right,
Mm-hmm.
but it could be the one on the left.
Ah, yes.
But
so
you don't know. But
So
you
what's the
believe,
problem? What is it that you don't have then?
You don't have evidence.
No, you have evidence.
Okay.
You have a knife, you have all this stuff, and you have a belief. The problem is you got a conclusion that is what? I gave you, if you watched the video the other day, I gave you different types of knowledge. Can anybody name them? Tacit knowledge, which is know-how. Emily is so great to give me that. The next one was, or give me the example of that. The next one was knowledge of acquaintance, that is knowing somebody through relation, like I know God, that, that's what, right? And then there's the final one, which we deal with mostly in epistemology, which is propositional knowledge, which is true or false statements, right? God exists. To know God exists, right? If it's propositional knowledge, that statement must be true. Would you agree? Okay, because you can't know something that's false, and that's the third thing we want is truth. Something, to know something, it must be true. All right? To know 2 plus 2 is 4, it must mean that 2 plus 2 actually is 4. Truth. Now we go. What is truth? And that is a deep question. What does it mean for something to be true? Eric. Don't look at your notes. It's not in there yet. We haven't talked about that yet.
What was the question again?
What's truth?
What's truth?
What do you mean by that word? You've used it.
Yeah, truth is something that can be tested. It can be proven.
Can be tested. Can all things be tested?
Everything. But
Can you test 2 plus 2 is 4?
Yeah.
You can apply it,
That's it.
right? And what kind of test would you apply to it anyway? 4 minus 2?
4 minus 2 is 2.
But that's just a different equation.
Yeah.
It doesn't, it's not a test. You can test students on it. If they get the same answer you told them to get, right? What's the truth? Don't look at your phone for it.
Something that's true.
No, you can't say that. Like, what's a car? Well, it's a car. That doesn't help me. That doesn't help me at all.
Something that can be proven to be true.
Again, what would it, and then how would you prove it? I mean, just because, I mean, can something be true that cannot be proven? What do you think?
I was saying, yeah, because of our belief system with God, we can't, like, we only have like testimony for it, we don't have.
Well, that's a source of proof, that's a source of justification.
But it's not like hard evidence, I don't. like-
Hard evidence. You mean back to empiricism.
Yeah,
See, this is the problem with what took place in the scientific revolution, is from then on, somewhere down the line, it got stuck in the schools where they start telling you can't prove God's existence, right? And what they mean by that is you can't take a beaker, like you do in a science class, and observe a liquid change from clear to yellow or whatnot, or from a liquid to a gas, because you can't see it with your eyes. You must not be able to know it, right? So people say you can't prove God exists, correct? But I like that you went straight to God, because those are the important questions, right?
but like, we know that it, like, he's there, but like.
Do we know? Yeah, but I mean, do we have to? Why does biology get a say in evidence about God?
I don't think it should.
It doesn't. So why would we say there's no evidence? And that's really what they're saying, is there's no scientific evidence. You said hard evidence, right? I mean, there are all sorts of fields of study where we cannot use this hard evidence, right? Somebody's a psychologist. You're a psychologist. Where's my psychologist in here? I mean, what about the mind? Does the mind exist? Can you see the mind? Can you study the mind from a biological way?
Well,
You can study the brain,
yes.
but the brain's distinct from the mind, correct? Our thoughts, so you can't measure a thought, but I believe your thoughts exist even if I'll never see, hear, touch, taste, or smell them, right? Okay, I can do all of that with your brain potentially, right? See, touch, taste, smell, or hear, but I mean, I can drop your brain on the ground, I suppose, and hear it splat, and I go, okay, your brain exists, but that doesn't tell me anything about the mind, right? But we can know things about the mind apart from the brain, and they're not physical. And I know your mind exists, right? I can say I know your mind exists, and I think I'm correct. There's nothing weird about that. I can know that if I look at certain paintings, I can say that's a beautiful painting, and I know beauty. What is the scientific formula for beauty? There are whole industries based off of beauty, and people buy beautiful things. What kind of music do you listen to? What?
R&B.
R&B. And there's some beautiful voices and sounds coming out of there, right? And people pay a lot of money, right? It's not very scientific either. Not very scientific at all. Let's see, what are the history? We can know history apart from these hard scientific things. All right, so morality, stuff like that. So you know, about God, we can know him. I just think they've picked the wrong fields, science that is, to try to claim dominion, you know, over knowledge of such things. Okay. So belief in God is provable, very provable. You just don't do it with a flask and a Bunsen burner or an incubator or, you know, a microscope. Those are not the appropriate tools, okay, to know God. If that makes sense to you.
Well, you could
You
prove it.
you could use evidence that, so you could use evidence to show that the world was created, and if it's created, then you follow the logic that there must be a creator.
Mhm.
But like the mind, God is not something that is a physical object, so God does
Yeah.
not follow the laws of physics. You're not going to be able to sense something that is, we sense things that are physical. We do not sense things that are non-physical. God is non-physical. There would be no reason for me to literally hear him unless he creates sound waves, okay? There's no reason for me to see him unless he manifests himself in a body such as with Jesus Christ. There's no reason for me to smell him. There is nothing to smell, right? There are other ways we experience God, just in the same way we have other experiences of aesthetic beauty, of emotions, of all sorts of things that we never question their existence. Okay? Does that make sense? So epistemology really has wrecked us, unfortunately, and we're the heirs to of bad epistemology. This idea that you could only know things through the senses, and because you go through public schools where they believe that and they teach that, you come to me in college after 12 years of being brainwashed by, you know, maybe well-intended but poorly educated people, philosophically at least, and you come in here believing you can't prove God's existence, but you can. You're just not going to do it with the senses. So that's a good thing. All right, so truth. We're trying to define. God exists. That's a proposition. It's a statement. It's either true or false. To know God exists means it's a true proposition. What do I mean by true?
It isn't wrong.
It isn't wrong. What does that mean? You're not so far off, but I just want to know what you mean by that. Isn't it amazing how we use the word true all the time? But yet I asked you what it means, and all of a sudden you're like, deer in the headlights, go ahead.
It could be something that's not wrong to you, but
To you.
like, and then you say, I guess true, but then they wouldn't think, like, they.
That's a disagreement.
Yeah.
So those are differences in beliefs, not differences in truths, right? See, they have a difference in belief about the truth. One believes 2 plus 2 is 5, one believes 2 plus 2 is 4.
Mm. But then how would they show that one is true?
Well, that's up to them, how they convince each other, okay? But, and there are ways we could do that. Well, you know, you start counting money, I can tell you what, you know, we'll find out pretty quickly. Point is, go ahead.
So, what can be true is having justification and also evidence behind something.
Yeah, but even if I have justification and evidence, I still can draw false conclusions. That happens all the time. Happens all the time. Here's something that's weird. I can give you 2 right now. Very controversial. Very controversial. One has to do with COVID. And I read an article says that 90% of the cases that have been positive, counted as positive, of COVID cases are actually not real cases of coronavirus.
96%.
Inaccurate.
That's inaccurate.
That's what the article's saying. It's saying
Yeah, 96% are.
of them are actually not even, right? Wow, that's evidence. Is that, but yet other evidence says no, they're all right. And so it's like, what do I believe, man? There's so much division, even in science. You know, people say there's so much fighting in your religion. No, you know what to believe. Yeah, but that's true with everything, and we can see it in science now, especially. Okay, That's one. Another one was, who's the guy? Blake, is it? That got shot in the back, the police officer shot him. I see that video and I'm like stunned. I'm like, holy moly, man, that was bad. That was bad. Okay. My eyes didn't deceive me. I saw a police officer holding a guy. I saw him shooting a guy. He was literally shot in the back. You're not supposed to shoot people in the back. Okay, alright, so my eyes are telling me something. Then I hear another set of stories because that's only part of the video then, and the rest of the video has not been shown. The other part of the video turns out that the guy had just raped a woman or sexually assaulted her, right? So he's just finished sexually assaulting her. He then takes her keys, steals her car, so she calls the police, okay? Apparently this guy's done this for several years to her, okay? So she calls the police get there. So now the police are not just like, oh, hey, we're here to shoot you, right? Now the police are there responding to a sexual assault. And they had tased him several times, which I didn't see before. He gets tased and he is unaffected. Now, if you're a police officer, anybody knows anybody, police officer, ask them, what's usually going on when you tase somebody and they don't respond? Why don't they respond? Not only drugs, but certain types of drugs, specifically PCP and meth, okay? And these guys, apparently the guy was just crazy strong and they were unable to do this. So these are things I didn't see on video. So there's more to the story, right? He says, I'm going to get my knife. Okay, so this guy is going to get a lethal weapon, and the guys had been unable to control him up to this point, and the guy's holding on, allegedly. This is the counter story. The counter story. I'm not saying it's the truth. What I saw was his hands holding on to the police officer, right? I mean, police officer trying to keep him from getting in the car. You do see him getting in. You do see him going in. I didn't see the knife. Allegedly, there is one. Allegedly. And then I do see him pump the guy full of lead. Okay. Thank God he's still alive. Okay, that's all I want. Even if the guy was a rapist. But for civilization's sake, thank God he's still alive. So now we got the truth. We got a question of truth. Was the shooting justified or was the shooting unjustified? If one person says, let's say the woman who was getting raped, says the shooting was justified, if she legitimately was assaulted, and she was there and she saw the whole thing, of course she's emotionally pissed off, you know. But let's just pretend that now we have two statements. The shooting was justified, the shooting was unjustified. They cannot both be true, right? One of them is true, one of them is false. You mentioned having evidence. I have evidence, and I may form a belief. Does it mean my belief is true? It does not. It may be true, right? I want to have evidence. I want to have the right evidence. I want to believe something, obviously, because I want to make a moral judgment out of it. I already believe morally that shooting people in the back for no justified reason is immoral. I already know that. So the question is, what category do I put this in? Morally justified or immorally unjustified? So I need to make a decision on how, given the facts, before I just jump to a conclusion and make a political statement out of it on one side of the aisle or the other, because you notice the two candidates for presidency are making statements about this, right? Would you agree, Emily? Have you been paying attention? Pay attention to the news.
I feel like there's so many different conflicting things with.
And you know what? How many people are actually asking themselves, could I be wrong? Could I be wrong about this? How many people are actually asking themselves that question? Now, here's where we go. Because it's perfect time because we have like 2 or 3 minutes left. How many of you in here have false beliefs? Raise your hands. No hands went up, for the record. One hand went up. All right, now you do. Okay, Drew, how, can you give me an example of a belief that you have that is false? I'll beat you to the punch. The answer is no. I hope.
Well,
Why do I say this?
can I be convinced that
Yeah.
I am, that like, let's say, as a sinner, I can be convinced that God isn't good enough for me, or like I'm not good enough for God.
Yeah, I'll go
So
with that one.
I believe that belief is false, and I have that at times. So I believe that I do have false beliefs at points in time where I don't.
Is that a
Full-
false belief?
I believe so.
So you believe it. So do you reject that belief?
I reject at
Yes,
points
you
I
do.
do,
So
but
the
at
point
times I accept
I'm trying
it.
to make here is, and I think that's probably the best attempt I've ever heard. Most of us, if you say, yeah, I got false beliefs, you don't know what they are. Because if you knew what they were, you change them. Right? That's the whole nature of belief, is you believe it to be true.
Yeah.
And so, of course, we have false beliefs, we're just not aware of them, okay? I'm not trying to get you to believe one thing or the other on any of this situation, like COVID or this, so we can all take our masks off, praise, oh boy, I wish we could. But let me tell you something. We should at least consider whether or not we are wrong, and be humble enough to say, I've been wrong before, I'm wrong right now on some things and I'm unaware of it. Therefore, it may be possible that I'm wrong in some of these highly sensitive situations that I'm going to go beat somebody up about. Right? So slaughter before you go beating people up over these political beliefs. Ask the question, is it possible? Have I looked at all the evidence? Given the other side the most charitable interpretation of it? And then use reason to determine that the likelihood of me being right is so good, that overwhelming, okay? Before you go beating up people. That, I think, would be better. And that's a good epistemological approach, because the goal of epistemology is to do what? Gain truth and avoid falsehood. See, these are all test questions. The examples aren't. But justified true belief sure is. Any questions? If we have no questions, we could end the video and I could release you for class.